Hello, God bless you. My name is Stephen Trainer. I'm the pastor and a missionary at Graffiti Fellowship Church in the Coney Island section of Brooklyn, New York City. It's time for today's daily devotion. This is where we read a chapter from the scriptures each day, generally 5 days a week. And we are nearing the end of Matthew's Gospel. We've been reading chapter by chapter, starting all the way in chapter 1 and reading in order through the Gospel of Matthew. And today, we're at Matthew chapter 27. So this is the next to last chapter in the book. And back in Matthew chapter 26, we saw Jesus' betrayal. We saw him arrested. We saw him spend time in the Garden of Gethsemane with Peter and other of the disciples. And we've seen also his mock trial before the Jewish council. We've seen him convicted on false testimony. And we also read about Peter's denial of Jesus. Peter followed behind the group of soldiers who had arrested Jesus. Peter's waiting outside of the location where the council are meeting, and he's observing. He's paying attention. He's seeing what's happening, and as he does this, people notice him in the crowd. People can tell that he's from Galilee. People recognize him from the past several years of Jesus' public ministry. And he's confronted. People say, hey, you're one of his followers. Hey, you must be with him because I recognize you by your accent. And 3 times, Peter denies having any relationship at all or even having met Jesus. And of course, this was prophesied by Jesus. And as we reach the end of chapter 26, Peter comes to the realization as he hears the rooster crow that Jesus' prophecy has been fulfilled and that he has indeed denied Jesus, and he's crushed. And that's how we close chapter 26. Now, chapter 27, it is another fairly long chapter, 66 verses. And in this chapter, we see Judas commit suicide. He falls a very tragic end. He succumbs to a very tragic end. We see Jesus now going from the trial before the Jewish council to now a trial before Pilate, who's the Roman governor. Remember, Jerusalem and the entire nation are under Roman occupation. And so the Jews are given some latitude for self-governance, but their governance is under the authority of the Roman government. And when it comes to something as serious as a death sentence, that has to be authorized by the Roman authorities. And so Jesus is now going to go through that process. We're going to see soldiers beat and humiliate and abuse and mock Jesus as he's in custody. We'll see Jesus' death on the cross, and then we'll see his burial. Matthew 27, again, this is a little longer chapter, just as 26 was. Verse 1 begins, very early in the morning, the leading priests and the elders of the people met again to lay plans for putting Jesus to death. Then they bound him, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priests and the elders. I've sinned, he declared, for I've betrayed an innocent man. So Judas, of course, has, for a price, for 30 pieces of silver, betrayed Jesus. Now he feels guilty, and so he's trying to return the money. What do we care, they retorted. That's your problem. Then Judas threw the silver coins down in the temple and went out and hanged himself. The leading priests picked up the coins. It wouldn't be right to put this money in the temple treasury, they said, since it was payment for murder. After some discussion, they finally decided to buy the potter's field, and they made it into a cemetery for foreigners. That is why the field is still called the field of blood. And this fulfills the prophecy of Jeremiah that says, "They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price at which he was valued by the people of Israel, and purchased the potter's field as the Lord directed." Verse 11, Jesus' trial before Pilate. Now Jesus was standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. "Are you the king of the Jews?" the governor asked him. Jesus replied, "You have said it." But when the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. "Don't you hear all these charges they are bringing against you?" Pilate demanded, but Jesus made no response to any of the charges, much to the governor's surprise. Now it was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner to the crowd, anyone they wanted. This year there was a notorious prisoner, a man named Barabbas, and as the crowds gathered before Pilate's house that morning, he asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" He knew very well that the religious leaders had arrested Jesus out of envy. Just then, as Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him this message: "Leave that innocent man alone. I suffered through a terrible nightmare about him last night." Meanwhile, the leading priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be released and for Jesus to be put to death. So the governor asked again, "Which of these two do you want me to release to you?" And the crowd shouted back, "Barabbas." Pilate responded, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" And they shouted back, "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" But the mob roared even louder, "Crucify him." Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere and that a riot was developing, so he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I'm innocent of this man's blood. The responsibility is yours." And all the people yelled back, "We will take responsibility for his death, we and our children." So Pilate released Barabbas to them, and he ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. Verse 27. Some of the governor's soldiers took Jesus into their headquarters and called out the entire regiment. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. They wove thorn branches into a crown and put it on his head, and they placed a reed stick in his right hand as a scepter. Then they knelt before him in mockery and taunted, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him and grabbed the stick and struck him on the head with it. And when they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the robe and put on his own clothes again. Then they led him away to be crucified. Verse 32 begins the subsection titled The Crucifixion. Along the way they came across a man named Simon who was from Cyrene, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. They went out to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, and the soldiers gave him wine mixed with bitter gall, and when he had tasted it, he refused to drink it. After they had nailed him to the cross, the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. Then they sat around and kept guard as he hung there. A sign was fastened above Jesus' head announcing the charge against him. It read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Look at you now," they yelled at him. "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well, then if you're the Son of God, save yourself and come down from that cross." The leading priests and the teachers of religious law and the elders also mocked Jesus. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Say he's the King of Israel, is he? Let him come down from the cross right now and we'll believe in him. He trusted God, so let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I'm the Son of God.'" Even the revolutionaries who were crucified with him ridiculed him in the same way. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a reed stick so he could drink. But the rest said, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah comes to save him." Then Jesus shouted out again, and he released his spirit. At that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. They left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many people. The Roman officer and other soldiers at the crucifixion were terrified by the earthquake and all that happened, and they said, "This man truly was the Son of God." And many women who had come from Galilee with Jesus to care for him were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee. As evening approached, Joseph, a rich man from Arimathea who had become a follower of Jesus, went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. And Pilate issued an order to release it to him. Joseph took the body, he wrapped it in a long sheet of clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb which had been carved out of the rock. Then he rolled a great stone across the entrance and left. Both Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting across from the tomb and watching. The next day, on the Sabbath, the leading priests and Pharisees went to see Pilate. They told him, "Sir, we remember that the deceiver once said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise from the dead.' So we request that you seal the tomb until the third day. This will prevent his disciples from coming and stealing his body and then telling everyone he was raised from the dead. If that happens, we'll be worse off than we were at first." Pilate replied, "Take guards and secure it the best you can." So they sealed the tomb and posted guards to protect it. That's the end of Matthew chapter 27. Thank you for participating in today's chapter and throughout the Gospel of Matthew. I look forward to next time when we will complete the Gospel of Matthew with the final chapter, chapter 28. God bless.